Hi, my name's Grant Garcia. I'll be the member of opposition.
Okay,
Thank
nice to
you
meet
so
you.
much. Thank you so much.
I'm Lexi Stefani, and I'll be the leader of opposition.
Nice
Thank
to meet you.
I'm Isabelle here. I'll be your prime minister, or your leader. Yes, prime minister. Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
Scott Larry, I'll be your member of government. Thank you so much.
Nice to meet you.
Thank you, Tommy.
So before you get around, do you have any judging philosophy or things you'd like to see or not see?
No.
Everyone's ready?
Mm-hmm.
My partner and I stand resolved that in a world where sometimes we think that a lot of something is better than something of good quality, we believe that the resolution should be affirmed, and that on balance, quality trumps quantity. Again, that on balance, quality trumps quantity. And we believe that under this resolution, we should view it as a value resolution, which is asking us to value quality over quantity. And so we would like to present the value of integrity, that we should value the integrity of a product or thing, and this should be our weighing mechanism of who can value this integrity in today's round. First, before we get into any more, we'd like to present some definitions to provide clarity in the round. Quality is defined as integrity, effectiveness, or rightness of a thing. Quantity is amount or abundance, the greatest number. And trump means to be valued more than. This leads us to our first contention, that of economics. We believe that the resolution can be best viewed and analyzed if looked at in the three major areas of the world. And that first area is economics. In the rule of supply and demand, the more we have a supply, the greater the price goes down, but the thing that is more readily available is not as valuable. If you take the comparison of gold versus plastic cutlery, then you would rather have $1,000 worth of gold than $1,000 worth of plastic cutlery. Partially because you can actually use gold, and I'm not sure how much use you'd have for $1,000 worth of plastic cutlery, but because gold, despite the fact that it's the same monetary amount, has more quality, has greater value to you than plastic, because of the integrity, the effectiveness, the rightness of it as a substance. We also see this in the rule of economics if you've gotten it by viable means. Almost anyone would agree that a person who is poor but gains his living by honest means is of greater quality, is a greater use in society than someone that is wealthy but has gained his wealth illegitimately and through dishonest means. We also see this in the case of America versus China. You'll probably have heard jokes about made in China, oh, it's probably going to break. Made in China, oh, it probably took forever to get here. We make jokes about things that are made in China. Why? Well, they produce a lot of stuff, but it's not always the best quality. However, if you see something that says made in America, you kind of have this yes moment because you feel much more assured that that product will have a greater quality, and therefore you value it more. Our second contention is that of government. This is the second major area of society where we can see that quality truly does trump quantity. In fact, this is a primary place where quality trumps quantity. We see this just essentially in government, that an effective government, a government that has a good quality, that is truly doing its job, is of much greater use and is much more valuable than a big government. In fact, most people, even a lot of Democrats, agree that big government gets in the way of being effective, of the integrity of our nation. And that having a smaller government, but an effective government that truly does its job well, would be much more valuable. We also see this in the idea of one just leader. One just leader is of much greater value than an entire mob of corrupt people. In the example of the French Revolution, there was no true leader. There were a lot of people that were trying to be leaders, and there was a great quantity of people that were trying to kind of regain France. And yet, the amount of bloodshed, the amount of terror, the amount of horrible actions that went on in that were not due to a low quality, but due to a massive quantity of people that did not have a quality personality and value. Yes?
You would agree that the leaders of the French Revolution did inspire their followers?
I would, which is why we can see that one just leader is of greater quality, of greater value than a whole people inspired to riots. Our last contention is that of society. If we look at the world as a whole, this is the last great area of the world that we can truly see that quality is of much higher value than quantity. We see this in the example of even just individual citizens. As Americans, as people all over the world, we would probably rather have one good citizen than 45 criminals on the loose. Why? Well, we have more people if we have the 45 criminals, but there's a greater chance of us being harmed. There's a much poorer quality of person on the streets, whereas we would much rather have a good quality citizen, a patriot that loves his country and will try to do the best to help his society. We also see this in the example of societies as a whole. People would rather have one moral society over an entire world of corrupt societies. And we see this even today, that people value America because she is trying, at least to some extent, to maintain her integrity as a nation and maintain some of those morals and values that we were founded on, when so many other countries are becoming increasingly corrupt and dishonest. We also see this in the example of human rights. There are three basic human rights: life, liberty, and property, or some people would say the pursuit of happiness. These are three, not a whole lot, not a great quantity, but of such significant quantity that out of these three rights come all other human rights. And all other human rights are considered lesser and are not valued as highly as these three primary human rights. These primary rights are called primary because they are given such priority over all other human rights. So for these reasons, we would strongly urge that you affirm the resolution with us, that on balance, quality trumps quantity. Thank
you. Okay, so far judges ready?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. And the timer? And the government team? Great then, let's get started. It is because my partner and I agree with the resolution that quantity is actually more important than quality that we negate the resolution. First, we'll tell you how we stand on today's resolution, and then we'll be going on to address the government team's case. But first, we do need to talk a little bit about the resolutional analysis that we can keep in mind as we go about the round. Essentially, they said that their only point of resolutional analysis with this is a value resolution. And so we need to look at it based on values. My response to this is that it's fact, not value. Fact, not value. Fact says this ought to be valued over this, or we ought to do this. But we really don't see the word ought at all in this resolution. It just says that quality is better than quantity. That's what the resolution says, and that's the way facts stated. Now, they did offer the definition of trumped, which is value better, but I actually would say that trump means that essentially one thing is better than the other. It doesn't mean we ought to value it more. It just means that one is better than the other, because that's what the common man thinks of the definition. So let's now look at the opposition's case, and let's look at our contention number 1, which is that quality is subjective. Quality is subjective. Our step point A under this is that it differs from person to person. So essentially, something I think is quality could be very different from something you think is quality. I might think that the clothing store Banana Republic has quality, whereas you might think White House Black Market or any other place has quality. So it just differs from person to person. Our second point B under this is that it's relative, so it depends on the item. So let's say for books, I define a quality book as the characters that are in it, but I define movies, a quality movie, by the plot line in it. So it definitely varies and differs, and it's not just it's much more complicated than just what I think of as quality. Our subpoint C, finally under this, is that quantity is specific. Quantity is specific. Essentially, nobody's going to argue about how much 10 is or how much 5 is because it doesn't differ from person to person. So when you cast, or if you choose to cast a ballot for the opposition team, you know exactly what you're getting, and you don't have to vote for some subjective airy thing that changes from item and person. Our second contention is that quantity is superior. Quantity is superior. We have 3 different examples to prove this point. Our application number 1 is democracy. Democracy is a whole bunch of people, the good, the bad, the ugly, but it's a bunch of people who come together to rule their government and make a difference in their society. Whereas if you chose the quality, or essentially what the government team is advocating, you choose one ruler, one king, which all you need to do is open up a history book and see all the problems that happen when we elect just one king or just that quality of person over quantity. Yes, I'll take 1 or 2 questions.
Is it not true that the same can be applied to government as it goes as far as effectiveness versus size?
Can you repeat the question?
Is it not true that the same principle can be applied not only to types of government, but size of government?
Size, I think it may, though I'll address that argument that you had in your case when I get to that. So the first point is democracy. The second application is that of small businesses, or a monopoly, if you will. Essentially, the whole thing under monopolies is that one business has a lot of quality products, or even not that many quality products, and yet they own the industry, whereas other small businesses who have more quantity but not as much quality because they don't have the money and the equipment to make the quality that the big businesses do, leads to things like monopoly. So if we only chose quality, then it would destroy a lot of small businesses. Yes, I'll take your second 2 questions.
Wouldn't small businesses technically considered to be smaller in quantity since they are just that, small businesses?
I think it depends on what they're making. There are some small businesses that can definitely produce a lot depending on what they're making, but the quality is definitely owning to the businesses who have the money to invest into their supplies. Our third and final argument under here is creativity. Essentially, when you have quantity, you have more options in a certain area. When you have more options, it leads to more creativity, distinction, differences than one thing that one person deems to be quantity to them. So it leads to more creativity and ingenuity within a society. Let's now move on to the government's case. So we're not really looking at values, we're just looking at whether this is a fact or not. So let's now move on to their first contention. They talked about 1,000 pieces of gold or something like that, or 1,000 pieces of plastic cutlery. Here's the problem, is that the resolution is mutually exclusive. It doesn't say, do you want a bunch of quality quantity, or do you want quantity? See, there's a whole bunch of quantity that is quality in the example of the gold, so this really isn't a good example under this resolution. Why? Because it's both quality and quantity in the example of gold. So it's only like 1 gold piece or 1,000 pieces of cutlery. So with that being said, let's now move on to their example of one poor person who works up their money and the wealthy. My response is that the wealthy need quality items in order to be wealthy. The wealthy need quality items in order to be wealthy in the first place. So it's really difficult to define whether one person's quality because of how they possibly work up to save their money. This is a very subjective idea, whereas wealthy, we know it takes quality in order to be wealthy. And you can cross-apply my argument with China under their whole first contention, cross-apply the monopolies that happen when we only choose quality over quantity. And now let's move on to their second contention, where they talk about big governments. Now my response to this is that this is not necessarily quantity, because big governments can still be controlled by one person because of the control that they have. It doesn't necessarily mean the people, it means that the control that they have. Again, North Korea is a super huge government that controls every aspect of the people's lives, but it's not quantity in this situation. With the French Revolution, the followers believed that their leaders were quality, so quantity is not here. And under the third contention, these are all hypothetical, and finally against human rights, it's more than just the three. Thank you.
See if I can get out of here. Throughout history, nations, governments, societies, economies have all found that when they rely on something of a lesser value, when they rely on something of a lesser quality, there will come a day when that thing will let them down. Ultimately, quality is what drives markets forward. Quality is what keeps a government moving. Quality is what makes society survive the dangers that it sees. Ultimately, quality is something that is the driving force by which all people are all driven. We all understand that we want things of good quality. We want things that will hold together, that will be good, that will be integrous to themselves. And I'll be responding to the arguments made within the previous speech with the basis of that argument. That quality in and of itself is something which is much better. Starting off, they respond to the resolutional analysis point by in essence saying that it's a fact. And my response to this is, even if it was a fact, it still is very value emphasized. I don't know if that's a word, but I think it is now. Ultimately, we are talking about whether one thing should be valued over another. They themselves said that they think quantity should be valued over quality in situations when we have to choose between the two. We're told to make a choice between whether we value one thing more or whether we value another thing. Yes, we're trying to do that based upon what is true, but that's also the whole point of a value debate. We don't cast away what is true in a value debate just because it's a value debate, not a fact debate. Moving down to their first contention, they were talking about how quality is subjective, and I have several responses to this. My first is that quantity without quality is bad. Again, quantity without quality is bad. If we look at this in a truly exclusive sense, like the opposition team would like you to, then we also have to look at the other side of the coin. Quantity without quality. If you had 1,000,000 disgusting bowls of pasta, or you had one really, really good bowl of pasta that you would come back to the restaurant each and every time to eat, which would you rather have? You would obviously rather have the one of more quality, because it means more. It has more value. In no instance has more quantity ever been valued above something of more quality. Now that doesn't mean that sometimes quantity doesn't have its place, but quantity without quality never has its place. Quantity with the exclusion of quality never leads to anything good, whether it be economics, government, or society. Now my second response is she was saying in essence that it's vague, and we don't really know what is quality. My response to that is some things are understood to be good quality. Some things are pretty much universally understood to have good quality. Take, for instance, a Lamborghini. You wouldn't drive a Lamborghini anywhere and somebody would say, that's worthless. They look at it and they understand that it has value, it has quality. Some things are universally understood to have quality, whether that's because of their use, their purpose, or their taste in terms of food. Oftentimes we see that things that are valuable are often the most universally valued things. People have always valued gold. People don't necessarily value plastic cutlery. I hate plastic cutlery. It doesn't do anything. That's something that doesn't have universal value, but something like gold is. Now moving down to the second contention, they were talking about how quantity is superior, and they provided the three basic subpoints of democracy, small business, and creativity. Starting off at the top with democracy. My first response is last true democracy was the French Revolution. The last true democracy was the French Revolution. Democracy, in the sense of what democracy truly is a rule by the mob, a rule without authority, a rule in which all of the people are valued equally. The last time that that happened was the French Revolution. And those same people that were the quantity, without the quality of moral standards, those same people were the ones that were running through the streets and taking people to the guillotine. Ultimately, that's something that destroyed that government and destroyed that society. They're also talking about small businesses. My response, first of all, is small businesses are just that. They're small. They're small. They're not big businesses. They're not these giant businesses. We're not talking about monopolies. In fact, that's exactly our point. Oftentimes, sometimes the smaller things that still make good quality products are what are great. We don't value small businesses just because they're small businesses. We wouldn't value a small business that, say, specializes in fixing air conditioning if it didn't fix the air conditioning. It wouldn't matter if they were a small business. If they didn't fix your air conditioning, you wouldn't want to use them. You wouldn't value that company. But if the quality of their work is there, then you would value them, regardless of their quantity, regardless of their size. Finally, they were talking about creativity. Creativity can take so many forms, and so many forms in which it's actually an exclusion to quality. And instances in which creativity exists, but quality doesn't exist. Creativity doesn't necessarily tie directly into having something that is good. Now moving down to the responses to our case, and she talked about the economics argument by, in essence, first of all, talking about the not understanding the argument about the gold, the analogy about the gold and the silver cutlery and everything like that. And then she was also talking about how applying again the small businesses point to this. My first response to this is it's not that we're taking 1,000 pieces of gold and 1,000 pieces of plastic cutlery and comparing those. Obviously, the choice wouldn't be very difficult. One thing would clearly have more quality because the quantity would be the same. But even if we reduce the quantity of gold in relation to the plastic cutlery, the value wouldn't change at all because the value of the gold will still be exponentially higher than the value of the plastic cutlery. It doesn't matter how much plastic cutlery you have. If you have any sort of reasonable amount of gold, then it's always going to be valued more, even if you have literally a million times more plastic forks and knives. Now, in regards to the contention too, she was in essence saying that big governments are always ruled by one person. For the first thing, we did provide my partner was talking about how one quality ruler will always be better than a mobocracy. Take, for instance, Queen Victoria of England. England was in its glory stage, not because it was ruled by a mob, but because it was ruled by one just leader, one leader that had quality. However, they're all right. When they have one leader, when they have no quantity, but the leader has no quality either, then exactly, it's not going to do anything, but that's not what the resolution asks us to look at. The resolution asks us to look at quality and quantity within a relationship, because each and every one of them on its own won't be better than the other. But in instances in which they're both there, in all instances they are both there, quality will always win out, because quality is the survival and the lifeblood of society. Thank you.
Bunch is ready then?
Mhm.
Yes, and the timer? Yes, and the... Yes. Alrighty, let's begin. Before I go into the specific line-by-line argumentation, I'd like to point out one very key point of observation. Let's get straight into that, and that is that quantity does not exclude quality. Quantity does not exclude quality. This is something that's been completely misrepresented by the government team, that just because we may have quantity does not mean that there is no quality in it whatsoever. So when they bring up their analogies such as 1,000 terrible bowls of pasta, that doesn't necessarily mean that that is only what quantity is. In the same way, it could be 1,000 buckets of gold. That's still quantity. Just because quantity may be more does not mean that there is no quality whatsoever. And with that, let's go into some of the line by line, starting with the negative case and moving up to the government team's case. Starting with contention one, his first response was that quantity without quality is bad. My first response to this is that, again, quantity can include quality. Quantity can include quality. This has been an assumption by the government team that has been wrongly misinterpreted. Yes, I'll take that.
Did not your partner say that quantity and quality were mutually exclusive?
She might have said that, but if she did, that was a small misspoke by her, and I apologize for that. But I would like to say that the point we're trying to make is that they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, but rather that quantity can include quality, but on the other hand, quality does not include quantity. Now, what do I mean by quality not including quantity? Quality refers to a singular object or a singular group. While quantity can include the quality of things, quality is simply limited to singular. Therefore, going down to our second response, talking about some things being good quality, some things are universally good quality. My response is that did not deny the argument. He did not deny the argument. He simply mitigated by saying that there are just some things out there that are universally called quality. However, that does not deny the argument that there are still subjective items out there. Almost everything can be considered subjective. Even what I may determine quality book versus a quality movie. That is even subjective between an individual's definition, not even between individuals. It still proves our point that it is completely subjective, while quantity is not at all subjective, but it rather is very clear. Yes, I'll take the second two questions.
Is individual subjectivity of quality necessarily a bad thing?
Is it necessarily a bad thing? It doesn't necessarily have to be a bad thing if that's what you're asking, but in many cases it can be a bad thing. For the example of looking to specifically our applications under contention 2. We can see that when people look to subjectivity, if you give priority or if you value that, you don't necessarily know what you're valuing, because you could be valuing something that someone else determines quality that you believe is not quality at all. Going down now to the contention 2, he said the last true democracy was the French Revolution. Now I have two responses. The first is that revolution, not government. Revolution, not government. The French Revolution was just that. It was a revolution. It was not a secure, complete, active government. It was something created until Napoleon Bonaparte stepped in and set up a government, which was not a democracy, which was a totalitarian society, which people considered him to be quality, thus further proving our contention 1. The second response is that quantity of people. I'm sorry, I still have a lot to get to. The second response is quantity of people. Now, the purpose of my partner's application was to say that there's a quantity of people in a democracy, meaning there are more people representing more people. We see this here in America. Our House of Representatives has hundreds of people all representing all 50 states. And what do we see? We see higher representation of people in this government versus societies such as North Korea, where it's one dictator versus the entire population. Quantity has better government because when we simply look to what people think is quality, which may not be quality even, we get to societies such as North Korea, Germany, and Soviet Russia. Going down now, he talked about that small businesses are just that, they're small businesses. However, my one response is that the quantity is the number of businesses. The quantity is number of businesses. We have to be looking at how many businesses. That was the purpose of my partner's application, was to say we have a quantity of businesses or many small businesses versus one monopoly which has quality items. This is very impactful because if we simply allow quality to trump, that would lead to all societies having monopolies, which would lead to examples such as John D. Rockefeller completely dominating the oil market and other things as well. Going down now to the creativity point. He says that creativity is not exactly quality. My response is exactly. Creativity is not quality because we have to value quantity in order to proceed in society, in order to continue in society, to innovate, to invent, to create new products. We have to have a quantity of businesses, people building off of each other and reforming other ideas instead of just one monopoly controlling everything, which allows them to set the prices at whatever they want. Going up now to the affirmative case. He said that the resolutional analysis has a value emphasis. My response is still fact. Still fact. Now, what is the impact of this, of us really trying to make sure that it's a fact resolution, not a value? Why does this matter in today's debate round? The impact is that it is either true or false. It is either true or false, meaning if we can prove that it is false in some instances, then an opposition ballot is warranted. For example, if you have a $1 bill and cut off a fourth of it, it's no longer worth $1. It is worth 0. It is either true, is either worth $1 or 0. You wouldn't say that's worth 75 cents. So a resolution cannot be mostly true. Because it's a fact resolution, it can either be true or false. Therefore, if we can prove to you all of our examples, or any of our examples for that matter, that of quality being subjective, democracy, monopolies, and creativity shows that a resolution is false some of the time, thus it cannot be a statement of fact. Going down now to contention 1. He says that one has more quality in the gold versus plastic analogy. My response is that these are equal quality. These are equal quality. As they brought up, if you have $1,000 of gold and $1,000 of plastic, that's equal quality because they're both worth $1,000. It's not saying that there's the same amount of gold and the same amount of plastic. They said $1,000 of gold, $1,000 of plastic. That's same quality as determined by monetary prices. So actually this application does not apply at all to today's debate round because these have the same quality. Because even though you may have more of plastic, that doesn't mean that it's worth less than the gold. As they stated themselves, they're both worth $1,000. Going down, he brought up the example of Queen Victoria. I'd like to respond to that with North Korea, Germany, and Soviet Union. All these people thought these leaders were quality, but because they did not have the quantity representation, it led to these dictatorships. Thank you, and I strongly urge an opposition ballot.
Okay, so are our judges ready?
Mm-hmm.
Great, and the timer? Yes. Okay, and the government team? Excellent, then let's get started. I have a few key voting issues, which are the most important ones in today's debate round, and I ask that you take them into consideration when making a decision. Voting issue number 1 is that quality is subjective. Quality is subjective. Now, while there are a few instances where obviously it's true or not, like my partner brought up, just because there's a few that are clear, we brought up many where it shows that I might think that one movie's quality, you might think it's not quality. I think one clothing store has quality, you might think another one has quality. So we can't really know what quality is. It's kind of like we're shooting in the dark, hoping to get quality, but we don't know if we're getting that. And that's a huge problem when you're casting a ballot for one side that's not clearly defined what it is and what it is not. Our voting issue number 2 is that quantity is assured. Quantity is assured. Nobody's going to argue with you if 5 pens is really 5 pens or not, because we know how much it is and you know exactly what you're going to get. So when you're casting a ballot, if you cast one for the opposition team, you don't have to be worried that if what you think is quality is really going to be quality in the world of the government team, because you know what quantity is and you know what it's going to give you. Which leads us to my third voting issue, and that is that quantity is better. Quantity is better. This is so important in today's debate, and if you take away anything, it's this. Because this is a fact resolution, whether it has value emphasis or not, both teams have kind of dropped the whole value, in fact, our value, so it still has to be fact. We're proving to you that because of these examples we've given you, it is no longer true, or the fact resolution is not true. Like in our case, how we gave the example of democracies. Because of the quantity of people in the government, there's more representation, there's more people taking part, and it leads to, well, a better government. That's because quantity is actually better. It's better than one quality leader because everybody or more people are represented in democracies. We also see the examples of small businesses versus monopolies. Yes, there's a lot of small businesses. Yes, they may not have all of the resources and money that big businesses do to create the exact same quality of products, but that doesn't mean that there should be monopolies. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't allow small businesses to thrive and create things simply because they're quantity and they can't meet the quality of other businesses. So this also shows us another clear example of where quantity trumps quality. Finally, we see the example of creativity. Now, our opponents brought up how, well, it doesn't necessarily lead to quality, and that's true. There have been so many times that creativity has led to anything but quality. But that doesn't mean that creativity is bad. Just because it doesn't always give us the perfect quality result doesn't mean that a quantity of it is bad. In fact, all healthy societies have the mistakes and have the quantity of creativity. And so even when we look through the opposition case, or the government case, we still see this to be true. They talked about we can, again, still see this to be true. And I'd like to also impact what my partner said about, against Queen Victoria, about take North Korea, take the Soviet Union, take different places like that. I mean, in North Korea, the people practically worship their dictator, Kim Jong-un, and yet, so they think him and see of him as extremely quality as one person, but that doesn't mean it trumps the quantity of people we see in different instances. So the biggest things to take away from this debate round are the voting issues that I've given you, is that we still, at the end of the debate round, don't have something that's quality. Now, I'm sure when you first heard quality, you thought, yeah, that's great. But the problem is you don't know if it's going to be quality for you. It's not exactly defined. And since we see that this is a fact resolution and we've shown specific cases where quantity is better than quality, that I would strongly urge you to consider casting an opposition ballot. Thank you.
Judge, at the end of today's round, my partner and I still stand firmly resolved that on balance, quality should trump quantity. Now, before I go any further, I'd like to bring up one very, very important point in today's round. Now, my opponents brought up the idea that quantity does not exclude quality, but quality excludes quantity. And when we brought up the idea that his partner actually said that they're mutually exclusive, he said, well, my partner must have misspoken. However, that can't be true because that was actually the entire tag of her argument against our contention 1. There's really no possible way for this to be a slip of the tongue because that was her entire argument. And so if that's true, then you really do have to choose quantity or quality, not one or both. And so that really is your decision. So we believe, therefore, that you should side with quality. First, I'd like to bring up my voting issues and extrapolate those into responses. The first is personal choice proves. Now, they keep saying, well, quality is subjective. And they say that like subjectivity is a bad thing. And sometimes, yes, it is. But in this case, it is a very good thing. Because we're not saying that, on the whole world should value quality over quantity. We're saying that every day, even in individuals, you will value quality over quantity. It's simply that simple. Every day you choose quality over quantity because we individually prefer to have a quality product, a quality lifestyle, a quality home, a quality relationship over a quantity. When we make best friends...
Point of order, actually. So please stop the time. I like to point out the idea of choosing a quality lifestyle, choosing these quality over quantity was not brought up in any of the constructives, so I asked you not to look at that argument.
But again, you do make choices. Subjectivity is not a bad thing. If you take music, for example, no one will argue that music is a bad thing. And there are many types of music. However, we all agree that music, as a thing, has quality. And sometimes the quality is subjective to us, but that does not mean that we will devalue music, because it is important to us individually every day. Also, that quality is always greater than quantity. Now, quantity, according to my opponents, is more measurable, but that doesn't mean that it's better. You could have 1 Lamborghini or 10 golf carts. It's not a hard choice as to which one has more quality. It's also not a hard choice as to which one has more quality, but which one would you choose? You would choose the one of greater value, and sometimes that's measured monetarily and economics. Sometimes it's measured governmentally about what will bring about the best result for society. Sometimes that's measured in society as to what performs the greatest good for the people, but it is measurable. Now, they also brought up the idea that North Korea had a quote-unquote quality ruler, but because there was no quantity, there was no democracy, then it was a bad state. No one in North Korea really thought they had a quality ruler, but they knew that if they didn't worship Kim Jong-un as a god, essentially, then they would be shot. That's not quality or quantity, and so it really doesn't apply to today's round. They also said that no government, in the revolution wasn't a government, there was a quantity of people. My response is government instituted, government instituted. After the French Revolution, a government was instituted by those same people, and there was a great, numerous amount of people that were involved in the government. Did it make it a better government? No, in fact, it made it a very poor government. It was a true democracy, but it was not truly good. Quality will trump quantity. If you look, finally, in my last voting issue, that of the 3 areas of society, the social area, the economic arena, and the government, that if you look at these 3 areas, if you look at having a quality society, a quality economy, and a quality government over having a lot of them, or a lot of government, or a lot of people in society, people will choose quality. It is innate within us that we want something of good quality over something that there's just a lot of. Because you can find a lot of a lot, but you cannot always find one good thing. And we always tend to value that one good thing, that one thing of good quality, that has integrity in its nature of the thing, more than a lot of something that's cheap and useless and doesn't do us any good. quality truly should trump quantity, because it is truly valuable and means much more to us than the simple mass number of something or someone. For this reason, we strongly urge a government ballot. Thank you.